Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding Ancient History, Understanding the Language of Antiquity. An ancient artifact has been interpreted, deciphered, and decoded. The artifact contains multi-layered messages of a metaphysical, spiritual, and technical nature. This artifact of great antiquity reads like a book in stone, a book that can be equated to a technical or engineering manual in stone. Having interpreted, deciphered, and decoded this particular artifact, I am curious as to whether or not certain individuals can bring unique perspectives to this endeavor and contribute to a broader discussion. Back in November of 2016, when I first began working to decode the petroglyph that you see before you, I had no clue that the process of interpreting and deciphering the messages that lay hidden within it would evolve into the level that it has. With that said, it was also during this period of time that I had pretty much laid out a preliminary template for a presentation that initially included 7 parts. Since then, and over the course of several years, it has evolved into a multi-part series that now includes a total of 10 parts. In part 1 of this video series, viewers will learn about various forms of symbolism associated with both the world pillar and the world tree, and how various cultures throughout the world still celebrate the significance of the divine union that is the foundation of life as we know it. As it relates to the divine union of both the masculine and feminine principles of creation, there was a point within the video presentation where I interpreted and illustrated the communion of these principles. It would be several years later, after having interpreted this aspect from within the petroglyph, that I would come across a video posted by Praveen Mohan entitled The Banned Files of Tipuruntai Temple. In the video, Praveen can be seen walking toward the temple and stopping just outside of the entrance. When he reaches the entrance, he looks up to see a series of carvings that have been engraved along the top surface of the entryway, and goes on to inform viewers about the meaning and the significance behind the carvings. When I initially saw this series of carvings, I immediately thought about what I had previously interpreted as it relates to the divine union of creation and the series of floral buds that surround the tree of life within this petroglyph. I thought it was curious that the carvings engraved above the doorway of the Tipuruntai temple in India looked somewhat similar to the floral buds that appear within the ancient Sumerian petroglyph that you see before you. So, keep in mind the shape, structure, and configuration of the floral buds surrounding the tree of life as we take a brief look at the following video clip.
Hey guys, today we're going into an extraordinary ancient temple called Thiruperundurai. And inside this temple, there are unbelievable carvings that can rewrite history. When we enter this chamber, your eyes are naturally attracted to the deity inside the chamber. But look on top of the doorway. On the lintel, you see a number of patterns. What are they? What do they mean? Are they meaningless patterns carved just for decoration? No, let's take a closer look at them. In chemistry classes, we learned about molecules made of different atoms. Are these molecules? Or are they simple flower designs? Don't they remind you of stars in the sky? Yes, these are 27 lunar stations called nakshatras. You can see these stations in the night sky. Lunar station, that's a fancy word, right? What is that? It's not a space station or something like that. Take the sky or the ecliptic and you can split that into 27 segments using groups of stars as markers for each segment. Each segment is called a nakshatra or a star system. Why? To calculate time, dates, seasons, everything can be done using these nakshatras. Today, most people think these are used solely for astrology. But think about how ancient people calculated time during the night. Did they not have any indicators of how to tell time during nighttime? No, you can tell time by following the positions of stars, groups of stars, etc. So these nakshatras were also used in astronomy.
As you can see, Praveen poses the question to viewers as to whether or not this series of carvings above the doorway is representative of molecules, atoms, or simple flower designs. However, what we ultimately learn is that the design of these carvings are actually representative of stars, and that the patterns of their configuration are representative of star systems. Referred to as the nakshatra star system, nakshatras were used to calculate time, dates, seasons, etc., and their configurations are associated with the astronomical and astrological sciences. As the floral designs surrounding the Assyrian Tree of Life and the floral designs that appear above the doorway of the Tipuruntai Temple appear to be similar, the question now becomes whether or not the meaning and significance of these designs as stars can also be applied to the Tree of Life. This is rather curious, because when I completed the interpretations for Part 1 several years ago, not only did I pose a specific question with regard to this petroglyph, but I also created an animated illustration of what Praveen Mohan alludes to within the video clip. To learn more about the history of the world pillar, the world tree, and associated symbolism, watch Part 1 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. So I'll begin this video trailer by giving viewers a little background and history about myself and how I came to interpret, decipher, and decode this particular stone artifact. It was during the mid to late 1990s that I experienced what is termed as the dark night of the soul. And as a result of my tumbling down this psycho-spiritual rabbit hole, I experienced a major shift in perception and began questioning the world and everything around me. At that particular time in my life, I had reached a crisis point which ultimately led me to question my purpose in life. During this period of time, I found myself visiting various web pages and online forums whose subject matter revolved around the study of human origins, archaeology, and ancient history, as well as information related to the occult, esotericism, and related symbolism. As a matter of fact, it was my visitation to some of these online forums and web pages where I first learned about the existence of the petroglyph that you see before you. Long story short, it would be over the course of several years that I would find myself learning about various spiritual and esoteric concepts and combining all of the knowledge and wisdom that I had attained thus far in order to begin making connections between various cultures and societies of antiquity. But little did I know that all of these activities would ultimately culminate and unfold as the realization and the manifestation of my soul's purpose, that being the multi-part presentation that I am presenting before you now. As I reflect back upon the time when I initially began working to decipher and decode this petroglyph back in 2016, it never really dawned on me as to just how old this stone tablet really was. During the process of interpreting the tablet, I was mainly focused on how many of the concepts that I had been learning over the years seemed to fall right into place with the hidden messages that were emerging from the artifact, kind of like putting puzzle pieces of information together, which resulted in a living narrative of sorts. What I mean by living narrative is that the information encoded within this stone tablet was created many thousands of years ago, and that it has survived the passage of time in order to convey a timeless message. In order to appreciate just how old this artifact is and the part of the world where it originates, Let's listen to a brief video clip where Matt LaCroix, in an interview with Alex Ferrari, talks about the Royal Ashburnopal Library and the age of many of the cuneiform tablets and artifacts that have been discovered.
Well, what about when we go to the ancient Sumerians, the very first civilization that ever exists on the planet? Now, quickly, I got to point out that I'm talking about the Proto-Sumerians, not the version that's told for a 6,000 year window with this later time period of civilizations that emerged in that same region. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But the original Proto-Sumerians, I believe, was the first civilization on Earth. And we have ancient cuneiform tablets that discuss that entire creation aspect and lowering of kingship to create these cities. Okay. Now, according to the Sumerians, they left behind these tablets that have been found in ancient libraries. Like the most famous is the Royal Ashurbanipal Library that was found in the area called Nineveh, which is the area around Mosul today in Iraq. And in 1849, a man named Austin Henry Layard discovered the greatest library that's literally ever been known to mankind. And most people talk about the Library of Alexandria all the time, but they don't talk about this. And because the Library of Ashurbanipal and later the Royal Ebla Library have the largest catch of cuneiform tablets in the world. And cuneiform is a type of writing where you etch symbols into clay or stone, but when you do that, it allows it, if you bake the clay or if you're in stone, it allows it to be preserved so much longer than any other form of recording information that you could ever have. Like, for instance, paper records is 500 to 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is stretching it. That's only if you get a place like the Tibetan library, like the Cave of 1,000 Buddhas that I talk about, where they found some of these ancient maps back in 1901 with R.L. Stein. That cave, the only reason those manuscripts were able to survive for 800 years, and that's how old they are when they were found, was because it was a very dry environment where they were sealed off. But that's not that long. 800 to 1,000 years in terms of looking at our past is really not very long. But how about something like cuneiform and these stone and clay that can last 5-10,000 years? And that's exactly what he found. In the library in 1849, he found over 30,000 cuneiform tablets. And in those, after they finally translated them, they found things like the Sumerian king list, as well as the Uruk list of kings and sages that almost nobody talks about. Because some people will say that the Sumerian king list is not accurately dated, yet they ignore the fact there's a whole nother set of tablets that agrees with it from another standpoint. And what they say in those tablets is they give the reigns of these ancient kings. And they lived and they ruled for enormous amounts of time.
So, in summary, Matthew states that the ancient Sumerians had a cultural tradition of recording, documenting, and preserving their history by way of cuneiform writing, which is the process of inscribing, etching, and encoding symbols and characters into tablets made of stone and clay materials. He goes on to talk about the preservation of information using paper-based manuscripts, which may last only a few hundred years under certain conditions, and compares this to the preservation of information using stone and clay tablets, which may last anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 years. So, based upon the estimated age of the cuneiform tablets that were discovered, we can better appreciate the fact that the raised image relief of this particular petroglyph is many, many thousands of years old. With that said, let's take a brief look at a video clip where David Ferrugio, in an interview with Billy Carson, talks about the CDLI at UCLA and the translation of cuneiform tablets that are publicly available online.
They're being translated by, right now, computers, for example. So you can go to the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library, and you can grab a stone tablet and translate it right inside the system.
Yeah, I live 10 minutes from there. I gotta go. I could just go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can just read it. And so the reason is like, wait a minute. So this is what it says. This is well documented information. And then we found even older stone tablets that have the same information on them. In other words, people were trying to duplicate the tablet. They wanted to save it in stone so it could stand the test of time. Now, when you get into the parchment paper and the actual written and stuff, all of a sudden you see that they've copied these stories, but they put a little twist on them. So you'll see stories where they've been kind of remixed and made it into a lot of these religious books.
During the interview, Billy mentions the CDLI. What is the CDLI? According to Wikipedia, the CDLI, or Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, is an international digital library project aimed at putting text and images of an estimated 500,000 cuneiform tablets online. Originating from the ancient civilizations of Middle Eastern cultures and societies, these cuneiform tablets are estimated to have been created between 3350 BC and the end of the pre-Christian era. In addition to speaking with David Ferrugio about the existence of the CDLI and its online database of cuneiform tablets, Billy Carson reinforces what Matthew LaCroix stated earlier about the methods of preservation used by the ancient Sumerians. He states that, in comparison to the use of parchment paper and other methods to record, document, and preserve information, the ancient Sumerians used clay and stone tablets to encode information because clay and stone could withstand the test of time. Having said that, let us now shift our focus and talk about the various components that form the underlying structure of foundation for the Tree of Life. In part 2 of this video series, we identify each of these structural components and learn about their configurations within the Tree of Life. We also come to learn about how one of these components is directly related to the concept of duality. What I find most interesting about this particular interpretation of the stone tablet is that in his interview with Alex Ferrari, Matthew LaCroix goes on to talk about his expedition to Turkey, where among recent archaeological findings, he discovered several ancient artifacts that illustrate the concept of a triptych doorway and its relationship to the Tree of Life. In his description of a central point, which appears to illustrate the unification of two separate aspects within our being, I can't help but being reminded of the concept of duality that emerges from within the interpretation of this ancient petroglyph. Let's listen to the video clip.
Now, this triptych 3 is based on this concept that we exist as a totality of 3 aspects. Now, you saw religion take that and then turn it on its head with the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. So they took that and they woven it around into something different. But ancient civilizations didn't talk about it like that. They referred it to as a triptych doorway all around the world. Whether you go from the Mayan sites down through the Aztec sites like Chichen Itza and Teotihuacan, or you want to go down right into South America, all the way throughout the world, what we find is that this triptych 3 doorway, like for instance, like also, I just want to mention, it's also in Cambodia, and it's throughout Southeast Asia, in Egypt, and it's in Turkey as in these sites. This triptych doorway, now what does it really mean? Well, it's this aspect that we have these 3 parts to us, these 3 fundamental parts. And if we can balance them all, we can reach these higher states of consciousness. And they describe them, and the Hindus describe them, and cultures around the world describe them. Hermeticism described it as this energy of like the masculine, the feminine energy, right? Or the left and right brain. And then this aspect of this central point of the 2 combining to create this 3rd aspect of our divinity. And what it means is they're trying to show us these doorways. They're showing this left and right doorway that if those are balanced in harmony, then there's this 3rd doorway that unlocks within us through this kundalini energy off our spine and this aspect of energy that we almost emerge and blossom and flower. And what they use to describe that is the ancient symbol of the flowering lily, okay? And that flowering lily became shown in French symbols later on and others. And it was this idea that if we follow certain teachings, we can flower into this incredibly divine and higher being. And in that state, they showed in this triptych concept, they showed how, again, and the other, sorry, but to add one more layer to that, it'd be like, if you think of the mind, the body, and the soul, and that would be the other aspect of that 3 to add that. And they showed these 3 crosses being lowered down in this same totality of that concept. Okay. And in the rock relief from Kef that shows this triptych doorway with the flowering of consciousness, it shows how he's passing the specific ancient spiritual knowledge coming out of a chalice or a cup. So it shows this ancient god Haldi, okay, who's also is actually his name is Haldi or Haldi, but I can't say that over and over again because it hurts my throat. So we're gonna say Haldi. Haldi is shown with the very first cup chalice ever in history, and he's taking out of that a seed of life or the pine cone, and he's passing that to this idea of a civilization, like to that civilization, the concepts of that, okay? And above him, he has a hat with the flowering, the fleur de lis from France on top of his head, and it's right at the central triptych doorway of the three doors, showing that what it's showing is that he's passing the spiritual pre-religious doctrine, the knowledge of how to reach higher states of consciousness and knowledge. Okay. But the symbol he's using to associate that with is the tree of life. The tree of, once you learn what the tree of life means, whether it's an ancient Sumer, which they show the same symbols, by the way, that's why you know, or it's at this Ararat civilization, the tree of life symbolizes balance and harmony. Okay. So if he is passing knowledge of the tree of life, the balance of harmony with the triptych doorways, how to reach higher states of consciousness, then it means with the associated three crosses that the crosses being equal on all sides, not that's a matters. The crosses being equal on all sides represents, drum roll, right? It's what I believe is it's simply the harmony and balance of all. The harmony and balance within, without, as above, as below, because we see hermetic concepts designed into that box as up above, above, below, the hermetic concept of as above, so below. And it shows the triptych doorways as being a step pyramid with the levels and then an inverted one below. So what I'm trying to say is you could go stare at that Kef box relief for hours and I have, and I can't even tell you how many hours I've stared at it, and you will discover something new every time. And what the point of that is they were handing down the ultimate knowledge, the knowledge of Hermeticism, which is the knowledge of reality, the knowledge of energy, ascension and within us to reach that, realizing like they're handing down the keys to how to become gods. That's what this is. And the cross originally was supposed to be associated with the chalice and the tree of life and the step pyramid that became the Chicana symbol in South America as balance and totality of harmony with all. And that unlocks the doorway to reach that kingdom within that was talked about by Christ through Jesus Christ as that concept of teachings. So imagine finding that origin point, Alex.
As it relates to the concept of duality, Darius J. Wright, in an interview with Alex Ferrari, describes the configuration of the construct, where he ultimately refers to our existence as the game of duality. Let's listen to the clip.
Now, when you go through the many different realms, right, they have different names. These realms have different templates, right? So one of them I'll share here is realm 5, which is the heavenly realms. Heaven is within the construct that we are within. It's not actually on the other side. It's within here. It's a certain template within the I'll just call it the
frequency.
Yeah, well, I'll just call this construct the game of duality, right? Let's just call it that. That's the thing.
To learn more about the concept of duality and its relationship to the tree of life, as well as other concepts related to the underlying structure of creation, watch Part 2 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. In the video trailer for Part 2 of this presentation, I gave a brief overview about my life and how I happened into the process of interpreting the stone tablet that you see before you. I'll begin part 3 of this video trailer by picking up where I left off and expanding upon some of the experiences that I previously shared. It was the summer of 1998 where I had finally reached a crisis point in my life, an intersectional crossroads of sorts where I felt like I was confronted with having to make definitive choices about the direction and the path that I wanted to follow in life. In order to facilitate the process of determining what it was my soul wanted to accomplish and how best to do it, I ordered several grams of iboga root bark from a source in Gabon, Africa, in hopes that its psychoactive properties could assist me with getting in touch with my higher spiritual self. Seeking deeper levels of insight and clarification about what it was that I wanted to accomplish in life, I would finally receive my order in the mail and made plans in an upcoming weekend to take the iboga root bark in hopes that it would assist me in seeing my way out of the psycho-spiritual impasse that I was experiencing. When the weekend finally rolled around, I ingested the root bark and waited for it to take effect. Hours passed, and the only thing that I experienced was a very mild, star-like twinkling within my perceptive field. Needless to say, it was a major bust, and I didn't have the type of experience that was typical of one who ingests the root bark. As I reflect back upon that time in 1998, I remember coming to the conclusion that maybe what I had received in the mail wasn't really iboga root bark at all, and that I had been swindled out of my money by those whom I had sourced it from. I also thought about the possibility that I may not have taken enough of it to produce the type of results that I was looking for. Either way it went, I would eventually dismiss my experience as a total waste of time. However, it would be about 6 months later in the early winter months of 1999 when I would begin intuiting the presence of something or someone who would emerge from somewhere within my physical being. Not long after making its presence known, there was an instance where I had intuited a small inner voice emanating from this presence, asking me whether or not I was ready to get in my boat. In another instance of intuitive communication, the same entity present stated very clearly within my mind that their presence would grow within me over time. Since that period of time in the late 1990s, I have often wondered whether or not the appearance of this entity presence in my life was a direct result of my having ingested the iboga root bark, because prior to my having done so, I had never experienced the type of intuitive communication that I was beginning to have. So, in my having shared this experience, do you think that the iboga root bark inadvertently may have awakened some dormant part of myself that I wasn't consciously aware of? How about the possibility that the iboga root bark may have been the emergence of a spiritual teacher, making themselves available to assist me in the navigations of my spiritual journey? Having posed this set of questions, we'll pick up where I am leaving off for now and continue with the story of my life in the next video trailer for part 4 of this presentation. In the meantime, let's get in our spiritual boat and sail into the details of part 3. In part 3 of this video series, we begin with a review of concepts that have been illustrated in part 2. With that said, I have developed this multi-part presentation in such a way so that each successive part within the video series gradually builds upon concepts that have been previously demonstrated within each of the preceding parts. So we'll begin by recalling that there are several component parts that are configured within the tree of life, and that one of these structural components is associated with the concept of duality. In a brief review of this concept, we'll listen once again to Matt LaCroix's description of a central point that emerges as a third aspect within the concept of the triptych, which is engraved within an ancient stone relief found in Turkey. Let's listen.
This triptych doorway, now what does it really mean? Well, it's this aspect that we have these 3 parts to us, these 3 fundamental parts. And if we can balance them all, we can reach these higher states of consciousness. And they describe them, and the Hindus describe them, and cultures around the world describe them. Hermeticism described it as this energy of like the masculine, the feminine energy, right? Or the left and right brain. And then this aspect of this central point of the two combining to create this third aspect of our divinity. And what it means is they're trying to show us these doorways. They're showing this left and right doorway, that if those are balanced in harmony, then there's this third doorway that unlocks within us through this kundalini energy off our spine and this aspect of energy that we almost emerge and blossom and flower.
From the perspective of creation, the central point that Matt speaks of is illustrated within this petroglyph as a component part of the foundation around which everything is built. It was during the process of interpretation that the inner core of the tree of life emerged as a frame-by-frame stacking of 12 orbital spheres which surround this structural component of foundation and the central point that Matthew LaCroix speaks of. Having said that, let's listen to what Billy Carson has to say about the existence of dimensions and the stacking of dimensions one atop the other in his interview with David Ferrugio.
Well, there's life in every dimension. We know that the universe itself is comprised of at least 11 dimensions, according to theoretical physicists, like Michio Kaku, for example. Otherwise, the universe would actually collapse. The numeric models would say that it would literally collapse on itself. We also discovered at the Brain Institute about 4 years ago that the human brain connects to 11 dimensions. So we see this connection between the brain and the universe, both having connectivity to higher dimensions. And so in each dimension is a realm. And all these dimensions are stacked directly on top of each other. We're sitting with dimensions stacked on top of us right now. They're compactified less than one Planck unit away from the next one in a 90-degree angle. And so that means that what's keeping us from getting into higher dimensions is nothing but a frequency. So if you can match the frequency or vibration of a higher dimension, you can walk right in, which could explain paranormal activity in our realm.
So to summarize, Billy states that the universe is comprised of at least 11 dimensions according to theoretical physicists, and that according to the Brain Institute, they have determined that the human brain is connected to at least 11 dimensions. He further states that there is a connection between the brain and the universe, and that they both have connectivity to higher dimensions. Billy goes on to describe each plane of dimension as a realm of existence, stating that there is life in every dimension, and that all of these dimensions are stacked directly on top of each other, less than one Planck unit away from the next one. When I happened upon this interview between David Ferrugio and Billy Carson, and had listened to Billy's description of the planes and realms of dimension and existence, what immediately came to mind were the configurations of illustration that I had created during the process of interpreting this petroglyph. I couldn't believe the fact that his description sounded a lot like the structure for the inner core of the Tree of Life. But what really got my attention was when Billy stated that these dimensions are stacked directly on top of each other, less than one Planck unit away from the next one. At this point, I was sort of spooked, because his stating that these dimensions are stacked directly on top of each other sounded a lot like the frame-by-frame stacking of 12 orbital spheres which surround the structural component of foundation upon the Tree of Life. Having said that, I am really curious as to whether or not there is a connection between what I have interpreted and what Billy has described. To that end, there is another interview that I happened to watch on the Next Level Soul podcast, where Alex Ferrari is talking with Darius J. Wright about the configuration of what he refers to as the construct. Let's listen to Darius' description of the construct.
So let's get into the construct. What is, from your opinion, this thing you call in the construct? Because there is something called simulation theory that quantum physics has put out and proven actually now that there is chances are that we're in some sort of matrix-esque construct. What is your understanding of that?
The construct is what we're in right now, right? So you could say that's the container, contains everything. It's actually a toroidal field as well. This is where you get many different realms stacked upon realms, all coexisting within here, right? This particular construct has a total of 12 realms, right? So 12 total within here. This is where we have the earthly realms. Realm 1, which is the realm that we're in within this construct, is the earthly realms. right? And there are other land masses still here that have not, you could say, has not been presented to us through the official model that we're given, right? So there are
You mean
land
on
beyond the
Earth?
poles. Yeah,
On Earth,
absolutely.
on Earth. Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure
Yes,
there's,
yeah,
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 Antarctica
yeah,
alone.
yeah. This is where all of the races are. You could say ET races exist, right?
Mm.
Even the, you could say, a lot of the, well, a lot of the bodies, the original giant bodies, angel bodies, are in stasis in Antarctica, is what I saw out of my body. Now, when you go through the many different realms, right, they have different names. These realms have different templates, right? So one of them I'll share here is realm 5, which is the heavenly realms. Heaven is within the construct that we are within. It's not actually on the other side. It's within here. It's a certain template within the the I'll just call it the
Frequency?
yeah, well, the I'll just call this construct the game of duality, right? Let's just call it that. That's the thing.
To summarize, Darius states that the construct can be compared to a container that also exists as a toroidal field, and that within this container is the existence of many realms that are stacked upon realms. He goes on to state that the construct contains a total of 12 realms. The existence of many realms that are stacked upon realms, a total of 12 realms? Now, is it just me or is it a coincidence? Because if you will recall, it was during the process of interpretation that the inner core of the Tree of Life emerged as a frame by frame stacking of 12 orbital spheres which surround a structural component of foundation for the Tree of Life. Although Billy Carson mentions a total of 11 dimensions in comparison to Darius' mention of 12 realms, what we all have in common between our descriptions of the dimensional plane is the fact that these dimensions or realms are said to be stacked directly on top of one another. This is beyond coincidence. Truth be told, I am beginning to believe that something is afoot. Something strange is going on here, and whatever it is, it appears to be by design. With that said, let's listen to another part of the same interview where Darius describes how, in the out of body experience state, the soul can access different realms of dimension by tuning into the specific frequencies associated with each realm. He goes on to talk about the two ways in which the realms of dimension can be accessed. The first way being through the halls of Amenti, and the second way being through the core of the Stargate. Let's listen to the video clip.
And it's just like basically tuning. It's like a radio frequency, right? So as you start to tune the radio frequency, you'll access different stations. Same thing once you're out of your body. Once you start tuning the soul to different frequencies, you access different realms within this construct. And you access these different realms as well, how I've been showing. There's two ways. One within the halls of Amenti, and also through the core of this realm, right? Which they call the core of the Stargate, which the Stargates give you access to all of the realms within this construct. The 12th realm exits you out of the construct completely, where you could actually step out from the outside, view it from the outside, see it from, you could say, God's point of view.
Having listened to Darius describe the various ways in which the soul can access different realms and planes of dimension, what stands out here is his mention of the core of the Stargate, with the operative word here being the core. So now why is that? Well, once again, and if you will recall, it was during the process of interpreting this petroglyph that the inner core of the Tree of Life emerged as a frame-by-frame stacking of 12 orbital spheres, which surround a structural component of foundation for the Tree of Life. Darius' description of the core of the Stargate and my description of the inner core of the Tree of Life is what is being compared here, for which the reference to the core in both instances makes me wonder whether or not this just so happens to be another case of coincidence. Although I feel like what appears to be coincidence is beginning to stack up, if you will, let's go back to the interview where Alex asked Darius to describe in detail each of the 12 realms.
Now, you've mentioned okay, so let's go into the 12 realms. Can you kind of go into a little bit more detail of what each realm is, or at least an explanation of what each realm is? Because I've heard of this concept before of the 12 realms. It's been sometimes said 9, sometimes different numbers, but generally speaking, the multiple levels that we all have to kind of go through. As far as, I don't know if it's called ascension. So like ascended masters who've walked the earth have transitioned into different levels and realms. We can get into that in a minute, but let's just go over the 12 realms as you know them.
Okay. So the ones that I know and the ones that I feel comfortable sharing right now are the ones that I've already shared, right? Because there's still certain things that I'm mapping out currently of specifics, like the realm of Eden, right? That's actually it's a place, right? That's here still, right? So yeah, I've just the ones that I've shared are the ones that I feel comfortable with at this moment. But yeah, so you have heaven here, you have the angelic realm, which is angels, right? The gods, right? Earthly realm, and there's a total of 12.
So, as we just heard, Darius indicated that he was only comfortable with describing the realms that he had previously spoken of, as he was still mapping out details and information with regard to other realms and their planes of dimension and existence. As it relates to the animated concepts of illustration for the frame-by-frame stacking of 12 orbital spheres and their framework of encasement within the inner core of the Tree of Life, I am curious as to whether or not this configuration of 12 spheres is actually representative of the different realms that Darius speaks of. With that said, what is most interesting about this configuration of 12 orbital spheres is that they begin to sound off, if you will, and express themselves in terms of sacred geometry. As such, Robert Gilbert and Robert Grant come to mind, as they both possess knowledge and expertise as it relates to harmonic resonance and the science of sacred geometry in all of its forms of expression. When most people think in terms of the word creation, many tend to associate this term with the Almighty God, who is said to have spoken creation into existence. However, as we continue to move through part 3 of this video series and build upon concepts related to sacred geometry, that being light, sound, vibration, frequency, and their various forms of expression through numbers and music, what will surprise most viewers is the revelation of an underlying structure that can be viewed from both an engineering as well as a mechanical perspective. During the process of interpreting this particular message from within the petroglyph, I was quite surprised about the emergence of this structure. What immediately came to my mind was a vintage episode from the television series Star Trek. Having said that, it would be interesting to see the reaction of the following individuals if any of them ever get the opportunity to watch this particular portion of part 3. I would love to be a fly on the mental and emotional wall within each of their minds as they view the expression of this structure from the spiritual perspective of divine creation. Next up, we'll take a brief look at a video where Praveen Mohan demonstrates the use of an instrument that he developed for the purpose of identifying patterns and symbols that are produced by different sounds. What I found most interesting about this video is that one of the sounds that Praveen makes not only produces the symbol of infinity, but it is also the same sound that is produced by the preceding structure that emerges from within the interpretation of the petroglyph. Let's listen to the video clip.
Okay, so it is a scientific fact that sounds can alter your body and mind. It's not a myth. Ancient Hindus used the same concept and created mantras by chanting certain sounds in certain frequencies. You can alter the mind and body. Okay, now let's try Om mantra and see how it visually looks, okay? Because Om is considered the mantra of all mantras. It is considered the frequency of all beginnings and ends. So let me chant the Om mantra through the cylinder and see what happens. Let's find out. Om, Om. I could see something like an infinity, guys. I don't know. I could see a sign like an infinity, which is weird. You see this? It looks like infinity, or like a, sometimes even DNA strand. That's odd. Let me turn off the lights, and I'm gonna see if we can get a better look at this, because this is really interesting. So it's pretty interesting, guys. So when I chant the Aum mantra, I saw something like an infinity. Especially when I turned off all the lights, I could see better. It looked like an infinity, sometimes even maybe three loops. It looks like a DNA strand or something like that. But then when I chanted more and more, there was also a weird vibration, right? So it just sort of, there was a reverberation. So let me go to the computer, and let's see how everything looks when we slow it down, okay? So I slowed this footage down, and you can tell that an interesting infinity symbol shows up when I chant Om. Is this just a coincidence? I don't know. It's really weird, because according to ancient Hinduism, Om is the sound of infinity and beyond. This is why Aum is called Pranava mantra, or the primordial mantra, or the sound of the universe. Please let me know what you think about why Aum looks like infinity. Is there a connection, or is this just a bizarre coincidence?
The fact that the infinity symbol is produced when chanting the Om mantra appears to reinforce specific concepts related to the structure that reveals itself from within this stone tablet. Up to this point in the presentation, we have spoken about two structures that have revealed themselves during the process of interpreting this petroglyph. As there is the existence of a third structure, let's refer to Graham Hancock and his knowledge of ancient Egyptian building structures and their various styles of architecture. Throughout his career as a journalist and an independent researcher, Graham Hancock has traveled to Cairo, Egypt, and its surrounding cities to conduct research into ancient Egyptian society and culture. As such, he is very familiar with many of the ancient temples and buildings of construction that exist throughout Egypt. Because this petroglyph has revealed the existence of a third structure that emerges as a two-in-one configuration of construction, I am curious as to whether or not Graham Hancock would be familiar with such a formation. When I initially looked at this third structure in its emergence from within the stone tablet, certain historical and biblical narratives came to mind. With that said, it begs the question: if such a structure were to actually exist, number one, is the structure built as an interior room of a temple above ground? Or, number two, is the structure built as an interior room of a temple located below ground? And finally, number three, is the structure built as an interior room of a pyramid located either above or below ground? If this structure does in fact exist, I suppose it remains to be seen.
Do you think there's going to be a place like what would be your dream thing to discover, like Göbekli Tepe, that says a definitive like perturbation to our understanding of Ice Age history?
Some kind of archive, some kind of hall of records. There's both mystical associations with the Hall of Records at Giza from people like the Edgar Cayce organization. There's also ancient Egyptian traditions which suggest that something was concealed beneath the Sphinx. This is not an idea that is alien to ancient Egypt. It's quite present in ancient Egypt. So far as I know, nobody has dug down beneath the Sphinx, and of course, there's very good reasons for that. You don't want to damage the place too much. But let's call it the Hall of Records. I'd love to find that.
As it relates to the structure in question, additional details related to what appears to be a foundational layout of the underworld also emerge from within the petroglyph. Based upon the labels of description that surround the layout of this underworld, I am reminded of certain details regarding Darius' description of the construct. So let's go back to the interview with Alex and Darius, where they talk about specific details related to the construct and the foundational layout of the 12 realms.
Now, you've mentioned the halls of Amenti a few times. What the heck is the halls of Amenti? Is it like the halls of the Akashic records? Can you explain to us what that is?
Okay, so the halls of Amenti are like when I talk about the halls of Amenti or the heavenly records, the cathedrals. These are just records, you could say, like a universal record database. It's like a in other terms, it's like a hard drive, right? That
The
contains
cloud?
all of the
The cloud?
yeah, the cloud contains all the history of what has taken place through the realm through that time period as well. Now, when I access the halls of Amenti, it's just that it's accessing a certain point in time, while at the same time it's accessing the present, because the halls of Amenti are still a present thing that still exists. All exists here, which could be accessed. You see, so there still are beings there in the present time that are still, there, right? But they hold an entire database of records within the Egyptian and Atlantis time event, right? So that time in particular. And what's interesting is when you access certain things within the halls of Amenti, or even the heavenly realms as well, but I'll just stick with the halls of Amenti, they have like these tablets, or like you could say books, right? Or certain crystals, right? When I was in the halls of Amenti, I remember seeing the first time there was a crystal there, and that crystal had a white fringe around it, right? And once you walk into the door, the passageway, all the doors are open, by the way, but once you walk in there, this crystal would change based off the frequency of the soul. Mine was green, right? And so when each soul walks into that door, it will change, right? Based off the certain energy signature frequency that the soul's bringing at the time. There's also certain doors and passageways that you can access where when you touch something, it sort of downloads all the information within you, but it's not necessarily like you get every single nuance of it. It's almost like you're getting the movie trailers. It's the trailer of the movie. You're getting all the good bits, and then over time, that slowly unpacks within you, and then you're like, okay, that makes more sense, etc., right? Also, in the halls of Amenti, they mapped out when you go down to all the way down the middle hall to the very end of it. They've mapped out the entire construct, all the 12 stargates, right? The entire realm that we live within, the 12 realms, 12 stargates, when they have it on like a table, and like they actually, the firmament, everything is there, and they have it all displayed. And in the halls of Amenti, there's certain halls as well that access due to frequency, right? So there's certain frequencies based off the stargates that they have aligned to within certain halls that you walk into, which gives you direct access to the many different realms within this construct. Because stars are based off certain frequency points, fixed dimensional space access points. Yeah.
So can you go into what you see with the cathedrals and what information is there versus the halls of Amenti?
So it's all of the records of heaven, right? The point in time of, or the records of heaven and present as well, because heaven is still here, right? But what was interesting when I was in the heavenly realms, right, is what we call iPhones. right? Or like iPads, tablets.
Mhm.
Like they actually have these devices within heaven. And it's just that it's another database, you could say. It's a form of organic technology. I remember seeing a girl holding this device that looked like a iPhone. And I was just like, why does she have a phone?
Well, I
Like,
mean,
why is
I
she
can
using
answer. I can answer that question.
go
Steve
ahead.
Jobs is on the other side now, so he's obviously manufacturing these in heaven. Obviously, he's now on the other side, and even God was like, "I got it. These are fantastic."
Yeah, yeah,
That's the only thing I could think of.
yeah. So that's a good one. But the yeah, they have organic forms of technology, right?
Mhm.
So that's what they use within the heavenly realms is what I've seen, like these tablets, these phone, but they're not phones, but they look very similar, right? And it's the same thing when you touch it, and it gives you access to an entire database of information of that what you want to access within the heavenly realms, right?
To summarize, Darius states that the construct is comprised of 12 realms, where the halls of Amenti and the hall of the cathedrals are located. He describes the halls of Amenti as containing information related to the ancient civilizations of Atlantis and Egypt, and the hall of the cathedrals as containing information related to the universal records of heaven. He continues by stating that information related to all activity that has occurred throughout the history of the construct is maintained within the universal database of the Akashic record and can be accessed through the Amenti and cathedral halls of record. Darius goes on to describe the organic technology used within the halls of record to access different databases of information and compares this technology to similar technologies that are currently used within the Earth realm and its plane of dimension. Having said that, I wonder if Darius' description of the construct and the 12 realms aligns with what the petroglyph revealed about the foundational layout of the underworld. It's a curious thing. I suppose this also remains to be seen. To learn more about the component architecture of creation and the underlying structure of the Tree of Life, watch Part 3 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. Previously in the video trailer for Part 3, I shared with viewers my experience with having ingested iboga root bark back in 1998 in hopes of reaching deeper levels of personal insight with regard to which direction I should take in life. In having done so, it would be a few months later in 1999 that I would begin intuiting the spiritual presence of something or someone that had come into my life. Not long after having made their presence known, this entity would initiate a form of intuitive communication with me and ask whether or not I was ready to get into my boat. It was during this period of time in my life that I had reached a spiritual impasse, not knowing what I wanted out of life. Having grown tired of corporate America and the career path that I had chosen, I felt a sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction. I was at a loss, not knowing what I wanted to do. So, in this video trailer for Part 4, I am picking back up with the storyline where I decided that I would try my hand at becoming an author and write an autobiography about my life. Recalling that I had read an article about writing as a form of therapy, I began setting aside some time to develop an outline that would assist me in organizing and building the overall theme of my personal narrative. Well, what started out as my intention to chronicle and document my life as a real-world narrative of personal experience soon began to take on a different tone. It would be at various points during the course of my writing that I would look at the unfolding of the storyline and determine that some form of automatic writing seemed to be taking place, kind of like my soul expressing itself through pen and paper. Many pencils, pages, and several notebooks later, I would find that I had developed a storyline whose narrative was steeped in symbolism. The storyline begins with me living in a house at the very end of a long, winding pathway which winds its way across the valley landscape of my soul. At some point, I make the mistake of crossing an established boundary and find myself eating strange fruit from a forbidden tree. Upon eating this strange fruit, I experienced a shift in perception, and everything that had previously defined the inner world of my being was shattered. As a result, I began wandering aimlessly without purpose, having been disconnected from the inner world that I had always known. In order to reclaim the fragmented pieces of myself, I decided to embark upon a journey of the soul in search of what I had lost. As I set about the long winding pathway across the valley landscape of my soul, I find myself picking up the pieces of the shattered and broken self that I had become. Determined to put my spiritual Humpty Dumpty back together again, I go about collecting the shattered pieces of once upon a time in hopes of forming a picture of what used to be, hoping to be made whole once again. As I continue in my sojourn along the winding pathway, I eventually come upon a great rift within the valley landscape of my soul. Finding myself standing on the precipice edge of the rift, I look out across the expanse of the Great Divide, where it becomes plainly obvious that some sort of disruption had taken place, having left in its wake a trail of great destruction. For as far as I could see, the great rift snaked like a wide chasm of division that had ripped across the inner landscape of my soul. From where I stood, I looked down at the shattered and broken pieces of myself that I had collected, wondering how this division could be healed. Having shared a portion of the preceding narrative from my book, some viewers may be wondering as to why I am sharing this story and what this story has to do with the interpretation of this petroglyph. Well, it just so happens that I used to live in an apartment complex by the name of Hall Tree Apartments, and during the time that I lived within this apartment community, the owner of the complex decided to have several trees removed from the rear of the property so that the apartments could be seen from the street below. However, many of the tenants couldn't understand why the landlord wanted to have the trees removed because it was during the summer months that the trees provided shade to the apartment units located on the backside of each building. In a conversation with my next door neighbor, my neighbor made it known that she wasn't happy about the removal of the tree in the back of her unit because the tree not only provided shade, but it helped to keep her apartment cool in the summer heat. It was during the course of this same conversation that my neighbor turned to me and asked me, "Do you know why they cut down the tree?" Now, considering the fact that we had just had a conversation about the reasons as to why the landlord had decided to have the trees removed, I found her question odd. Kind of like asking why George Washington decided to chop down the cherry tree. Anywho, I will pick back up with the storyline related to the writing of my book in a following video trailer. In the meantime, it is in part 4 of this video series that viewers will learn about concepts related to the process of division, which results in defining specific areas within the field. As above, so below. As within, so without. To learn more about the process of division and its effect within the field, watch part 4 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. Previously, in the video trailer for part 3, I posed a couple of questions with regard to the appearance of an unidentified entity that made its presence known in my life. After having ingested iboga root bark in the summer of 1998, it would be 6 months later, in the early winter of 1999, that I would begin intuiting the presence of something or someone that would ultimately begin establishing a form of intuitive communication with me. Prior to my having taken the iboga root bark, I had never had such an experience. As I reflect back upon this situation, there are a couple of questions that arise. In my having ingested the iboga root bark, number 1, did I inadvertently awaken some dormant part of myself that I wasn't consciously aware of? Or number 2, Is it possible that Iboga represented the emergence of a spiritual teacher, making themselves available to assist me in the navigations of my spiritual journey? Or is something more sinister going on? The reason why I am posing this set of questions is because since my having ingested Iboga, I have observed and experienced strange activity within my perceptive field. It is as if I crossed some invisible line of demarcation within the hourglass sands of time and space, an invisible threshold where whoever or whatever that lay beyond some perceived boundary still isn't quite clear. Since that time in the early winter of 1999, when the presence of an unknown entity asked me whether or not I was ready to get into my boat, I found myself writing a book entitled The Book of a Moon, Nomad, The Journey of the Soul, in addition to learning about concepts related to symbolism and numerology, as well as the study of ancient history, the occult, and the esoteric sciences. Now, on the one hand, I have gained much knowledge and wisdom over the years as it relates to this hyperdimensional school of study, if you will. On the other hand, and at the same time, I am also dealing with the dark forces of spiritual warfare that seem hell-bent on impeding my spiritual progress. When I reflect upon my life of experience thus far, I have pondered the following questions. Was my soul's purpose activated or initialized when I reached a certain point on my spiritual path? Did the ingestion of iboga root bark play a part in me awakening to my soul's purpose? Did I accomplish the interpretation of this petroglyph in a previous lifetime prior to this current incarnation? And finally, in my writing The Book of a Moon, Nomad, The Journey of the Soul, there is a point within the book where I write about being propelled forward in time to a hypothetical future in order to document the effects of the war upon the soul. If by any stretch of the imagination that were true, is it possible that I am walking the reanimation of this path, sort of like a pre-programmed path of predestination? It's a curious thing, because if you will recall, it was in 2016 where I felt like I had received a hyperdimensional download of information related to this petroglyph, and that everything that I had learned and was taught up to this point in time was now being applied to this stone tablet. Having said that, is it possible that I may have been an adept or an initiate within the mystery schools of ancient knowledge and ancient wisdom? Or is it possible that I am walking a path of spiritual initiation, something like the spiritual path of the initiate? As it relates to a possible path of predestination, I do in fact wonder whether or not I have been here before in a previous lifetime. I say this because in my having incarnated this time around and again, it would appear that in some instances that I am repeating certain sequences of activity that I have already accomplished. This can only happen if I have in fact been here before. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, as I stated earlier, there are times when I feel like a student within a hyperdimensional school or classroom of instruction, and that I am being taught from within the spirit by the presence of a spiritual teacher, if you will. I say this because between 2010 and 2018, I lived in 3 separate apartment communities. In each of the communities where I previously lived, it is each apartment and the structure of each apartment building that I lived in that was used as the basis to teach, instruct, and to convey knowledge and information as it relates to some of the concepts that I have illustrated within this petroglyph. So for example, between 2010 and 2012, I lived in an apartment community by the name of Woodland Greens Apartments. I lived in a 2-story building comprised of 4 apartment units where each unit was numbered as 16, 15, 14, and 13. I happened to live on the 2nd floor of this building in apartment number 14. Within the hyperdimensional classroom of spiritual instruction, the apartment numbers were used to convey concepts related to the fifth elemental atom of Hiram and the divine principles of numerology in their application to the tree of life. The structure of this apartment building was used to convey concepts related to the cross, the square, and the cube. Within the master bedroom of my apartment was a set of double-door closets separated by a narrow portion of wall. This closet configuration was used to convey concepts related to the central column of the tree of life and the principle of duality. During the time that I lived in this apartment, there were 2 children and their parents that lived in the apartment beneath me. The children used to run across the length of the apartment into the master bedroom and bounce what sounded like a ball upon the middle strip of the wall that separated the double-door closet. Whenever the ball would hit the middle strip of the wall, I would be reminded of concepts related to the tree of life. As it relates to symbolism, the configuration of this double-door closet is also symbolic of the spiritual doorways within. If you will recall the video trailers for Part 2 and Part 3 of this video series, Matthew LaCroix, in his interview with Alex Ferrari, speaks at great length about concepts related to the aspect of duality and the triptych doorways. Between 2012 and 2013, I moved to an apartment community by the name of Autumn Ridge Apartments. I lived in a 3-story, multi-unit building which was comprised of 9 apartment units. Unit numbers 102, 103, and 104 were located on the first level. Unit numbers 202, 203, and 204 were located on the second level, and unit numbers 302, 303, and 304 were located on the third level. I happened to live on the second floor of this building in apartment number 203. The apartment numbers for this community were used to convey concepts related to the fifth elemental atom of Hiram, the portal tripod, and the divine principles of numerology in their application to the tree of life. The structure of this apartment building was used to convey concepts related to the cross and the fifth elemental atom of Hiram. Between 2013 and 2018, I moved to an apartment community by the name of Hall Tree Apartments. I lived in a 3-story, multi-unit building which was comprised of 12 apartment units. In building number 1, unit numbers 101, 102, 103, and 104 were located on the first level. Unit numbers 201, 202, 203, and 204 were located on the second level, and unit numbers 301, 302, 303, and 304 were located on the third level. I happened to live on the third floor of this building in apartment number 301. Both the apartment numbers and the structural configuration of the apartment buildings for this community were used to expand upon additional numerical concepts related to the cycles of the universal calendar and the divine principles of numerology in their application to the tree of life. The entire apartment complex was used to convey concepts related to the configuration of the sacred temple of the universal consciousness, the temple of man, and the inner construction of various churches and ancient temples around the world. Having demonstrated how 3 different apartment communities located several miles from one another were used as a basis for learning concepts that I ultimately applied in the interpretation of this petroglyph, is it just me, or is it simply coincidence that something like this could occur? Hence, the name of the last apartment complex, for example, Hall Tree Apartments. Sounds to me like a blend of the Hall of Records, the Halls of Amenti, and the Tree of Life. Hall Tree. It makes me wonder whether the interpretation of this petroglyph is alluding to the existence of a hidden structure. Moving right along, it would be over the course of several years that I would find myself spontaneously being moved to create and draw 2 specific structures. One diagram of illustration consisted of me creating and drawing a structure that can be compared to the Temple of Man. Another diagram of illustration consisted of a series of 14 concentric circles, like wheels within wheels, which ultimately wound up looking like a record album. I would later come to learn that what I had been creating was something that can be compared to the wheel of Anima Mundi. There came a particular time on my spiritual path where I received intuitive instruction to begin labeling and defining each concentric circle with a specific year. In so doing, I was instructed to begin with the year 1998, the same year when I began my spiritual journey of the soul. So, beginning with the innermost circle, I applied the numerical label of 1998 to this circle, and I would continue in numerical sequence by applying the years to each successive circle in sequence until I reached the outermost circle of the 14th sphere. When it came to the year 2012, I was instructed to draw a line from the center of the spheres and to label its extension beyond the spherical boundary with the year 2012. Additional details related to Scorpio, Ophiuchus, and Sagittarius emerged at this time, and I was instructed to create labels for each of them and place them at specific positions within the boundary. As this petroglyph reveals the emergence of a sphere from within a construct of concentric circles, let's listen to Billy Carson in an interview with Danny Jones, where he describes the construct of our universal dimension as being a holographic sphere or a spherical light matrix that exists within the shadow of a higher dimension.
We know now that we are all immersed, fully immersed, inside of a matrix of light. And it goes deeper than that. Where did this matrix come from? Where is it being broadcast from? Scientists in a laboratory discovered how to make an 8th-dimensional quasi-crystal. And then they pointed this quasi-crystal in a particular angle, which cast down a 4th-dimensional quasi-crystal. And when they put that in a particular angle, it created a sphere. And that sphere is what we're living in, a sphere of light matrix. We're living in the shadow of a higher dimension, not a shadow of a dark shadow, but a shadow of light from a higher dimension. That's where we're located. And this dimension that we're in, this universe that we're in that's made of this fractal holographic light, it is probably not base reality at all. We're probably not even close to base reality. 14 students at a university created a game called No Man's Sky.
Yes.
80 quadrillion worlds in this program, unlimited life forms, and the game never ends. They were talking recently about, what if we inject AI into this software? That's on one DVD. You put AI in there, now these beings are alive. Hey, who made us? Where did we come from? Who's our God? When does the Big Bang start? The Big Bang is when we turn on the console. So now all of a sudden we're creating universes. And so will be the Sims. The Sims will be conscious with AI. The Sims are going to create programs and software within the program. And then they're going to create a universe. I think that there's many layers to reality. And I don't think we're close to base. I think that we're just one of Google's of actual simulations that are running simultaneously.
In another reference to a spherical construct, Darius J. Wright, in an interview with Alex Ferrari, describes what it's like to view the construct of our reality from God's point of view.
These other constructs that you were seeing, first of all, what is the environment that you're in? Are you in a dark void with literally like things on a shelf kind of vibe? Or is it just kind of like they're kind of everywhere in this dark void? Or is it light? What does it look like being outside of this construct?
Well, what I was, the place that I was in when I was outside of the construct had like it's like this golden, I have an image that I share all the time to show people, but it's hard to explain without actually seeing it. But I don't know if you want me to bring that up at all.
If you have it right now, can you bring it up?
Yeah, I have it right now. I'll just share one.
Share this image. I'd like to see what it looks like.
So, so this is the image to best illustrate when you're outside of the construct of what it looks like, what I was showing when you're outside of this particular construct that contains 12 realms. Now, as you see here, right, you see where the individuals are standing, right? Like they're standing, viewing the construct from the outside. That's what it's like. The souls are massive, right? And the puddles on the floor, things like that are all different constructs. It's just, I just said constructs stacked on God's shelves, but this is the best image that I could share to illustrate that, what I was showing. Now, what exists outside of all of this, you could say this space is the void, the black space, right? And the void, the black space is you could say the beginning of all things, if there ever was a beginning, but it's the point where all things are created from. So when individuals think that light is first, right? Light is always secondary because light is birthed from the black space, right? Even when you go into religious texts as well, God created the firmament, created this earthly realm experience, right? He said, let there be light. Light was secondary. Even when you close your eyes right now, you're inside the void. And when you start to imagine something, you birth the light in creation, birth the light into creation, right? So light is always secondary from the void from the beginning, right? And then you access here, which is all of the different, you could say, constructs, realms, spaces for the soul to delight in its senses and experiences, right?
During the course of the interview, Darius shares an image of the spherical construct and goes on to describe in great detail what it is like to view the containment from an external position of perspective. As Darius makes reference to the golden hue of light that can be seen within the outer environment surrounding the construct, what I found interesting is both Billy and Darius' explanation for the source of the light. Although their explanations appear to differ, what you come to realize is that they are actually saying the same thing, just in slightly different ways. Let's listen once again to Billy and Darius' description of the light and compare their explanations.
We know now that we are all immersed, fully immersed, inside of a matrix of light. And it goes deeper than that. Where did this matrix come from? Where is it being broadcast from? Scientists in a laboratory discovered how to make an 8th-dimensional quasi-crystal. And then they pointed this quasi-crystal in a particular angle, which cast down a 4th-dimensional quasi-crystal. And when they put that in a particular angle, it created a sphere. And that sphere is what we're living in, a sphere of light matrix. We're living in the shadow of a higher dimension, not a shadow of a dark shadow, but a shadow of light from a higher dimension. That's where we're located. And this dimension that we're in, this universe that we're in that's made of this fractal holographic light, it is probably not base reality at all. We're probably not even close to base reality.
This space is the void, the black space, right? And the void, the black space is you could say the beginning of all things, if there ever was a beginning, but it's the point where all things are created from. So when individuals think that light is first, right? Light is always secondary because light is birthed from the black space, right? Even when you go into religious texts as well, God created the firmament, created this earthly realm experience, right? He said, let there be light. Light was secondary. Even when you close your eyes right now, you're inside the void. And when you start to imagine something, you birth the light in creation, birth the light into creation, right? So light is always secondary from the void from the beginning, right?
Where Billy describes an experiment related to an 8th-dimensional quasi-crystal, which in turn creates a 4th-dimensional quasi-crystal that produces the spherical matrix of light that we exist within. Darius describes the existence of the void as the beginning of all things and the source from which the light of creation is made manifest. What is interesting to note here is that according to the information that has been interpreted, deciphered, and decoded from within this petroglyph, what the three of us have in common is the construct of a sphere which defines the containment of our physical existence. To learn more about concepts related to the construct of the spherical boundary and the birthing of the sphere, I invite viewers to watch Part 5, Subpart 1 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. As it relates to part 6 of this video series, it was back in the year 2018 when I happened to come across a video posted by Jimmy Corsetti entitled Incredible Electromagnetic Properties of the Great Pyramid of Giza, Egypt. In the video, Jimmy references several news articles reporting on a study conducted at the Great Pyramid of Giza. The results of the study concluded that the Great Pyramid has the ability to concentrate and focus electromagnetic energy throughout its internal structure. Jimmy goes on to talk about mounting evidence which points to the fact that the Great Pyramid of Giza is not a tomb built for the pharaohs, but rather it appears to be a technological structure whose original purpose is not very well understood and may very well have been a structure that was originally established as a geo-power plant for the purpose of generating power. Let's take a brief look at the video clip.
The evidence is overwhelming that what we were taught in school about ancient human civilization, particularly about the ancient Egyptians, is far from accurate. Specifically that our true history was once far older and advanced than we ever thought possible. And the most recent scientific evidence further demonstrates that the Great Pyramid of Giza, Egypt, was not a tomb built for the pharaohs, but is literally a massive technological structure that is beyond our current understanding. You may have seen the news articles that reported on a recent study published in the Journal of Applied Physics, which was conducted by researchers and physicists from Germany and Russia, which provided scientific data based on calculations which showed that the Great Pyramid can concentrate electromagnetic energy inside of its internal chambers as well as under its base and inside the subterranean chamber. Now, the significance of this discovery cannot be overstated because we now have scientific data which supports the theory that the Great Pyramid of Giza was in fact a technological structure of some kind. And I discussed this in detail last year in a video I made where I combined Nikola Tesla's concept for harnessing wireless energy out of the earth, and I make the case that the Great Pyramid may have been a structure for generating power, a theory that has been proposed for decades by researchers such as Christopher Dunn and others. But with the recent discovery involving the Great Pyramid of Giza's ability to concentrate and focus energy, we have to start asking serious questions as to what this massive and mysterious structure's purpose actually was.
During the course of watching Jimmy's video back in 2018, I was struck by the radio wave images that showed the concentration of electromagnetic energy within the Great Pyramid. What had immediately come to my mind at that time was that a year prior in 2017, I had been working to develop and apply several concepts in part 6 of this video series. As I continued watching his video, I thought it coincidental that during the process of deciphering this petroglyph in 2017, I had created a structure similar to the formation of radio wave images that were being shown in Jimmy's video. When looking at the column of concentrated energy that appears within each of the radio images, the electromagnetic energy appears to be uniform and somewhat constrained. In other words, there doesn't seem to be the random or broad scattering of energy within or throughout the Great Pyramid, but rather it would appear that the organized formation of focused energy seems to be constrained by the underlying architecture of a construct that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Now, if this in fact is the case, then we are left with a question as to the material composition of such a structure. As it relates to the structure in question, there came another instance where I happened upon a video by Graham Hancock entitled Ancient Civilizations, where he describes in detail the construction of the King's Chamber located within the Great Pyramid of Giza.
At the top of the Grand Gallery, you have an entrance to the King's Chamber. This is the King's Chamber here. And above the King's Chamber, not known until the early 19th century, are 5 more chambers. And getting into those chambers is really fun. I'll come to that in a moment. But let's first of all go into the King's Chamber. And this is what the King's Chamber looks like. Those are those shafts again. This is the northern shaft, the southern shaft's on this side. one pointing to Orion's belt and the other again pointing to one of the circumpolar stars. It's a beautiful geometric room. It's made of granite blocks. The Great Pyramid is a limestone monument. These granite blocks were brought about 500 miles from Aswan. They were lifted to a height of hundreds of feet above the ground and put into position in this extraordinary chamber in the heart of the pyramid. There is a sarcophagus in it. I and my colleagues believe that this is not a sarcophagus that ever contained the body of the pharaoh Khufu, or of any pharaoh. We think that it was involved in some kind of process, some kind of initiation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But because there is a sarcophagus in it, immediately the assumption has been made that this must have been the burial chamber of Khufu. Let's look at this setup again here. The king's chamber and the so-called relieving chambers up above it, rather similar to the Jed pillar, the symbolic backbone of Osiris, which is a symbol of resurrection and rebirth in the ancient Egyptian religion. It seems that they were creating a symbol of resurrection, of rebirth within the Great Pyramid. To get into those rooms, here's what you do. You put a ladder 30 feet high up against this wall, and you lean it up against that side there, and there's a little hole just a bit wider than me, which fortunately a rope now hangs out of, and you grab hold of that rope, haul your body into it, pull yourself through, and then you get into a narrow tunnel, and that leads you into the first and eventually into all five of these chambers. And I'll just take you to the top chamber. That's that one up there. And again, these extraordinary, huge blocks of stone. These are in the range of 100 tons each, which form the floor of this chamber. And indeed, all the other chambers, again, have these gigantic blocks of stone, which are almost impossible to move, really.
What I find interesting about this particular video is Graham's reference to the 5 relieving chambers that are located above the construct of the king's chamber, and their symbolic reference to both the Jed pillar and the backbone of Osiris. When I think about the similarities between the radio wave images, the construction of the king's chamber, and the structure that emerged during the deciphering and decoding of this petroglyph, I am curious as to whether or not the overall interpretation of the encoded messages contained within this stone tablet can provide additional information as to the function, operation, and purpose of the Great Pyramid of Giza. With that said, I invite viewers to watch Part 6 of this multi-part video series in order to better appreciate the correlation between the radio wave images, the 5 relieving chambers located above the construct of the king's chamber, and the animations of illustration that have been interpreted from within this petroglyph. For interpretations related to the history of the Jed pillar and its relationship to the god Osiris, king of Egypt, I invite viewers to watch Part 1 of this video series. As it relates to viewing each successive part of this video presentation, viewers will ultimately come to learn that the hidden messages contained within this petroglyph can be viewed and understood from many different perspectives. In my efforts to decode the information presented in Part 6 of this video series, there came a point during the process of interpretation where I was moved to view this ancient artifact from both biological and scientific perspectives. In so doing, I was quite surprised to see the emergence of a DNA strand from within the 5-level structure of animated illustration that I had created. I was even more surprised to learn that the structure of DNA and other recent discoveries found within the Great Pyramid was the subject of discussion between Robert Grant and Alex Ferrari during a Next Level Soul podcast. Let's listen to Robert Grant in the following clip, where he discusses his recent findings after making connections between the images that appear within Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper and similar images that were discovered within the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
The entire Last Supper painting is a map of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Here's the DNA.
Yeah, I could see the movement on it. I can see the arcs of it. I could very easily. I mean, look, it helps that there's a pattern at the top. So just by matching it, you just look and you go, there it is. Yeah, there it is. Absolutely.
But you can even see the nucleotide pairs and the way they're twisting in perspective drawing. That's like impossibly difficult to do.
As it relates to the strand of DNA that emerged during the process of decoding this petroglyph, I am left with the impression that additional information related to human biology has yet to be discovered. In a related video entitled "The Code of Life Openly Hidden Between the Lines of Ancient Text," let's listen to Greg Brayton give a brief overview about an ancient message encoded within our DNA.
There is a message in our DNA. It exists. It's been revealed, it's been read, it's been translated, and by following the instructions left to us in some of our most ancient and cherished traditions, we can now literally read the code of life as the letters of ancient alphabets. And when we do so, our genetic code becomes words, and the words become sentences. Although you may have always sensed that we're here on purpose, and that whoever, whatever is responsible for our being here may have left something hidden for us deep in the mystery of our lives long ago.
From within this petroglyph, it is the configuration of the 5-level structure and the DNA strand combined that appears to be conveying a timeless message. It makes one wonder how such a message could have been encoded in this way in the first place. To that end, let's listen to Billy Carson in an interview with Danny Jones, where he talks about an experiment where information and data was written, downloaded, and stored within human DNA.
They found out in the laboratory, Professor George Church, he did an experiment with DNA. He said, okay, let's see if DNA can store information, all right? So he was able to take one of his ebooks, and he actually was able to convert the digital zeros and ones into A's, T's, and G's and download it onto DNA in a volume. And he said, man, it worked. I got my book onto the DNA. Let's see if I can replicate it. He replicated his book 80 billion times on 1 gram of DNA. One drop.
80 billion times.
80 billion times. And then what did he do? He said, okay, let's see if we can get it back. So then he converted the A's, T's, and G's back into zeros and ones and uploaded it back to the server. So he knew now that DNA can send and receive information in a volume. And so they said, wait a minute, this is incredible. So now they found out that one human body can store over 13.5 billion years of data just in your DNA. The secrets to unmasking this entire universe is in each one of our bodies right now. We just have to tap into it. All the data is in there.
Now, what really got my attention was a portion of another interview where Billy Carson and David Ferrugio of the Dead Talks podcast discuss information with regard to the genetic modification of humans by the Anunnaki. According to Billy, it was during this process of genetic modification that Enki was to have hidden a specific type of genetic code within the human DNA.
There's one thing you just triggered in my head, because it kind of what I was just saying about they don't want us to know this. Yeah. I remember listening to you saying something, maybe it was the Anunnaki, that when there was something in their DNA that we were restricted at certain levels of growth or abilities. I'm saying that in a very silly way, but
Well, they set it up, through, if you read the Epic of Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation, similar creation stories, they talk about the fact that they took the existing being on this planet, which would be us, our cousins. They weren't Homo sapiens sapien yet, and they genetically modified them. When Enki did it, he had love for humans. For whatever reason, it's not really truly clear why he fell in love with humans so much. His brother was against that. His brother was Enlil, also known as Yahweh in the modern-day Bible. But Enki hid a little extra code in there. So his job was a mission where he was given the task of unplugging a lot of our DNA, genetically tinkering with us, shrinking our pineal gland, getting us to not tap into our higher selves and see them as the gods so that we would do the work for them. So the best slave is a slave that doesn't know it's a slave. If we're laboring for you because we think we're honoring the gods, that's what it was really going. That's what really going on.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, right. It keeps playing over and over again. But he hid a little code in there. And in the myth of Adapa, another ancient text, it talks about the fact that they discovered unbeknownst to Enlil, and he was very pissed off about this, that mankind, Adamu or Adam, us, Adapa, we had encoded in our body the mysteries and the secrets of the universe. And a little something, a time capsule genetically was put into us that when we reach a certain level of consciousness, it would unlock itself. And we would see this incredible growth and this incredible a path for mankind going in the right direction, seeking the light and growing beyond even our wildest dreams. And that we, even ourselves, we can achieve higher levels than even the Anunnaki had achieved. And so that's in a text called The Myth of Adapa. And that the wisdom of the entire universe is inside of our bodies.
Referring to an ancient text known as the Myth of Adapa, Billy states that the Anunnaki discovered that the mysteries and the secrets of the universe were encoded within the human body of the Adapa or the Adamu. He goes on to mention that a time capsule had been genetically placed within the human body of the Adapa, so that when mankind collectively reaches a certain level of consciousness, the time capsule would unlock itself and lead humanity under higher states of existence. As it pertains to the reference of a time capsule, what I find most interesting is that the 5-level structure that emerges from within the interpretation of this petroglyph also presents itself as a time capsule. Next up, we'll take a look at a video entitled What They Found Underground Can Never Be Revealed, where Praveen Mohan visits the town of Adalaj in India and takes viewers on a tour of the Adalaj stepwell. When I happened upon this particular video, what I immediately noticed was the shape of the temple structure. In addition to the surface level construction and configuration of the temple, there were 2 other features about the structure that I found most interesting. The first feature being the number of inverted levels that define the structure of the temple, and the second feature being the existence of 2 separate wells. Let's take a look.
Hey guys, today we are going to look at a very mysterious structure in a small town called Adalaj. In the middle of the roads, houses and trees, what is that strange lingam-shaped structure? Is this a secret government organization or an underground bunker? No, this is a historic structure known as Adalaj Ni Vav, almost perfectly aligned along the north-south axis. Its design is totally unique. It does not have an entrance on the north side at all, and no entryways in the center of the structure as well. But on this side, it has 3 entrances with steps in 3 directions, right next to one another. Why was such a unique architecture built many centuries ago? What are these 3 octagonal structures on top? Now, let's get on the ground and try to get a closer view. This is a very surprising structure because nothing is visible from the ground level. Usually, I show you structures starting from ground level and going up. In this one, we start from the ground level and we are going to go down. Yes, this is an underground structure, but you know how many levels, how many floors go underground? It goes 5 stories below. It has 5 different levels. What do experts say about the structure? Experts call this the Adalaj stepwell, and it was designed with 2 separate wells to provide water to the public. A giant structure with so many levels and carvings just to provide water. But there's an even more weird claim. Wikipedia calls this an Indo-Islamic structure, meaning that the structure was built by both Hindus and Muslims. How is this possible? We have come more than 75 feet deep and we have reached the bottommost level of the structure, and you can see this circular well. It looks remarkably simple, seems to be about 12 feet in diameter and just 30 feet deep. There are steps radiating on all four sides to help people access water from all sides. Is this well really the primary purpose of building this vast 5-storied underground structure? As you can see, there seems to be nothing else here. So let's go back up and look at the other details. No, wait, what about the second well? I told you there are 2 wells here, right? Where is the second well? Let's go past this first well and see if we can find it. After we go past the first well, there is another structure. And you can see a narrow entrance here. It is just 2 feet wide. It is so narrow that only one person can go through. And here we can see the secret second well. It is smaller than the first well, and it's also less deep. If you look carefully into the well, you can see the bottom. It is probably less than 15 feet deep. Why would anyone build 2 separate wells right next to one another? I mean, they're for the same purpose, to draw water, right? Today, imagine you're building a house. Would you dig 2 separate wells or put 2 bore wells right next to each other? This would be like putting 2 separate entrances in front of your house. Nobody does it because there should be no use for this. But the original builders must have had a valid purpose for this, and we cannot understand what it is. Why is this well hidden from public view? And see here, a very fascinating carving. 2 kissing fish. What do they mean? I have repeatedly shown you carvings like this. They indicate the presence of groundwater underneath, and here we see it directly in the walls of the well. And look at the walls. You can see the shallow rectangular chambers. 3 chambers specifically. Inside these chambers, you can find carvings of Hindu gods. And each chamber would be visible from one floor. Why did they put these carvings and chambers in this wall? What is the real reason for building such a fantastic 5-storied structure? As we come out of the second well, you see this area. Between these 2 wells, it is completely covered. Look carefully. Do you see anything strange? Now, from this side of the first well, look at the architecture carefully. There are no dome-shaped arches. This looks like a typical Hindu architecture. They put large pillars on the sides and had very wide rectangular passages. And notice the pillars. The pillars are not made of bricks. They're not plastered. They're made of giant sandstone blocks. But now, let's go to the opposite side of the same well and look at the other side. This is shocking because it is a completely different architecture. These are Islamic doorways with those typical curves and arches. They're not made of giant stone blocks. They're all made of bricks, and they're covered with plaster. This is a typical Muslim construction that you see in a mosque. So on one side you see a Hindu architecture, and on the other side we see a Muslim architecture. Who really built the structure? Hindus or Muslims?
In summary, Adalaj Nidvalv is the name of an Indo-Islamic lingam-shaped temple whose structure is also referred to as the Adalaj Stepwell. This particular temple features 3 entrances located at its southern end, which lead into an underground structure. Commonly, most temples are accessed by entering into the structure from the ground level, where one ascends upon each of the interior levels of the temple in an upward fashion. However, the Adalaj temple is unique in that its structure is accessed by entering in from the ground level and then descending into each of the interior levels of the temple in a downward fashion. Similar to an inverted pyramid, the interior temple of the Adalaj stepwell descends 5 stories below ground. Having said that, let's listen to a video clip where Matt LaCroix describes the Hermetic concepts of as above, so below, and how these concepts apply to the construction of ancient temples and pyramids, which are symbolic of the inner temple of man.
We see Hermetic concepts designed into that box as up above, above, below, the Hermetic concept of as above, so below. And it shows the triptych doorways as being a step pyramid with the levels and then an inverted one below.
As we go back to the Adalaj stepwell, we can descend 75 feet below ground unto the lowest level of the temple, where 2 separate stepwells have been designed in their construction to provide water to the public. As it relates to symbolism, what is interesting to note here is that the first stepwell is bordered by a series of steps in the shape of a square that surround and descend unto the circular well of water below. Additional symbolism can be found by viewing the first stepwell from the Muslim side, where one can see the Hindu architecture of 2 sandstone pillars. When looking at the construction of these pillars, one is reminded of esoteric teachings related to the obelisk pillars found in Egypt, the pillar of the sun and the pillar of the moon, as well as the pillars of Jachin and Boaz. When viewing the first stepwell from the opposite position on the Hindu side, one can see the esoteric symbolism in the Muslim architecture for the triptych configuration of Islamic doorways. As a matter of fact, I am reminded of what Matthew LaCroix, in an interview with Alex Ferrari, had to say about the spiritual meaning of triptych doorways.
This triptych 3 is based on this concept that we exist as a totality of 3 aspects. Now, you saw religion take that and then turn it on its head with the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. So they took that and they woven it around as something different. But ancient civilizations didn't talk about it like that. They referred it to as a triptych doorway all around the world. Whether you go from the Mayan sites down through the Aztec sites like Chichen Itza and Teotihuacan, or you want to go down right into South America, all the way throughout the world, what we find is that this triptych 3 doorway, like for instance, like also, I just want to mention, it's also in Cambodia, and it's throughout Southeast Asia, in Egypt, and it's in Turkey as in these sites. This triptych doorway, now what does it really mean? Well, it's this aspect that we have these 3 parts to us, these 3 fundamental parts. And if we can balance them all, we can reach these higher states of consciousness. And they describe them, and the Hindus describe them, and cultures around the world describe them. Hermeticism described it as this energy of like the masculine, the feminine energy, right? Or the left and right brain. And then this aspect of this central point of the 2 combining to create this 3rd aspect of our divinity. And what it means is they're trying to show us these doorways. They're showing this left and right doorway that if those are balanced in harmony, then there's this 3rd doorway that unlocks within us through this kundalini energy up our spine and this aspect of energy that we almost emerge and blossom and flower. And what they use to describe that is the ancient symbol of the flowering lily, okay? And that flowering lily became shown in French symbols later on and others. And it was this idea that if we follow certain teachings, we can flower into this incredibly divine and higher being.
At this time, I would like to summarize the information that I have presented thus far so that viewers can understand the overall point that I am trying to make here. The ultimate purpose for my having gathered and collected information from various sources is for the purpose of determining whether or not the underworld of the Duat might exist as a multi-level structure beneath the Bull Mountain of Mount Taurus and the Rostau Plateau in Egypt. Because according to the interpretation of hidden messages that have been encoded within this petroglyph, it would appear that an ancient structure of great antiquity has yet to be discovered, and that this structure may have some relationship to the Bull Mountain of Mount Taurus. Let's go back to Billy Carson in his interview with David Ferrugio, where he talks about a hidden underground in Egypt.
And these halls of mentions were deep underground in some cases. The one he talked about was underneath the Great Pyramid. Now, I've been down this subterranean shaft, which goes down 65 meters. I think maybe less than 4,000 people have ever been down this shaft in history of Egypt. Since they started, letting people come to the pyramid. And then another 30 meters down beneath that. And there's more to go beneath even that.
There's more?
Oh, there's more.
And you know what's down there?
Oh, yeah. No, all that's down there is you have chambers. They discovered them through a special type of a scan, a muon scan. They discovered these huge halls underground, underneath the Great Pyramid that extend out underneath Giza a mile. And all of them appear to be potentially empty. They won't tell us what was there or what wasn't there. But these halls of Amenti that were written 36,000 years ago by Thoth, they actually exist right now today.
So when you said they won't tell you what was there, is there what's going on there?
In other words, they won't give us an idea if they went down there and found something and took it away, or is it still there? They won't give us that data, but they have confirmed the halls are actually there.
What are they hiding, you think? It's known, though. It is, some people know what's going on.
Yeah, there's some people know, yeah.
So are you going to get to that?
Zahi Hawass and many others. It's called the Halls of Amenti, where they have the rejuvenation chambers.
As I stated previously, similar to the 5 relieving chambers found above the King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid, the emergence of a structure comprised of 5 separate housings was indicated during the process of deciphering and decoding this stone tablet. Additionally, there is the configuration of an inverted triangle within the first housing of this 5-level structure. As it relates to the configuration of the Adalaj stepwell in India, what we've learned is that its lingam-shaped temple is similar in shape to both the 5 relieving chambers found above the King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid and the 5-level structure that emerged during the process of interpreting this petroglyph. In the Hindu tradition, the lingam is representative of the Hindu deity Shiva, who is known for their role in creation and destruction. The phallic shape of the lingam is symbolic of divine generative energy and represents the cosmic balance of male and female energies that are essential for the eternal process of creation and regeneration. This union of masculine and feminine energies represents the merging of the microcosm and the macrocosm and the balance of energies that recreate all of existence. What is interesting to note here is that there are several instances throughout this multi-part video series where I have created animated illustrations of concepts that are similar to the description of the Shiva Lingam. I invite viewers to watch The Marriage of Divine Union between the god Osiris, King of Egypt, and the goddess Isis, Queen of Egypt, in part 1 of this video series, as well as the sneak previews for part 7 through part 10 in order to appreciate and understand these concepts and how they apply to the existence of an ancient structure that has yet to be found. With that said, let's get back to highlighting certain features about the configuration of the Adalaj stepwell. Number 1, the stepwell was designed as an inverted temple whose structure is comprised of 5 separate levels that descend underground. Although the Adalaj Nidvalv Temple in India and the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt do not appear to have any obvious connection, I am still curious as to whether or not a multi-level structure or 5-storied structure similar to the Adalaj stepwell might be located below the base of the Great Pyramid and beneath the Giza Plateau, based upon the focused concentration of electromagnetic energy as seen within the radio wave images, the configuration of the 5 relieving chambers located above the king's chamber, and the configuration of the 5-level structure that emerged from within the petroglyph. Number 2. The southern entrance of the Atalaj stepwell features 3 sets of stairs that descend into the lower levels of the structure. As the 3 sets of stairs represent the eastern, western, and southern entrances into the temple, their configuration of construction results in the pattern of an inverted triangle at the southern entrance of the stepwell. This pattern of an inverted triangle located at the furthest end of the structure is similar to the inverted triangle that is configured within the first housing of the 5-level structure that emerged from within the petroglyph. Number 3. Similar to the presence of 2 separate wells that are located within the Atalaj Needvalve temple, it is in part 3 of this video series where viewers will learn about the inner core of a construct that can also be viewed as a well. And finally, when we look at the petroglyph from biological and scientific perspectives, we have come to learn that a strand of DNA emerges from within the 5-level structure and that their combined configuration ultimately results in a timeless message. As Praveen Mohan has a background in engineering, and both Billy Carson and Robert Grant have backgrounds in physics, I wonder if between the 3 of them, they might find clues throughout this multi-part presentation and finally solve the riddle of the ages-old mystery once and for all. On a final note, and as it relates to the emergence of a 5-level structure in part 6 of this video series, it is the title of Graham Hancock's best-selling book, Magicians of the Gods, which foretells of an unexpected revelation related to the magicians who are the Magi and the Ascended Masters of Magic. To learn more about the DNA time capsule and its hidden mystery within the inner temple of man, I invite viewers to watch Part 6 of Ancient Messages in Stone, Decoding the Assyrian Tree of Life. Well, that's it for this video. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be notified when we post new videos. Until next time.